Hi, this is Brian Crombie. I am the chair of Transit Alliance, and tonight what follows is a Transit Alliance meeting with Phil Verster, the CEO of Metrolinx. Phil is an incredibly experienced transit and train operator from around the world that is now the Chief Executive Officer of Metrolinx, which runs Go Transit. And Transit Alliance is a civic advocacy organization that I have the privilege of chairing. And last week we had a virtual meeting with Phil Verster to talk about what was happening in transit with Metrolinx as the reopening occurs. And then also we ended up having a conversation with an economist and the head of infrastructure consulting for KPMG about what's happening with COVID-19 from an economic standpoint and how the head of infrastructure at KPMG thinks that transit organizations need to adjust. So here it is, Phil Verster, Transit Alliance. Thank you for joining us.
People with very limited impact. We've given all of our people care packages. We have modified our buses and our workspaces with polycarbonate screens in order to keep people safe. We've put face coverings out to our own people as part of the care packages. We have done an incredible amount of work, and just as a thought, we have about 40-odd business continuity processes related to how we run a business during a crisis. All of these were activated. All of these were working to some or other extent. We have used the pandemic as an opportunity to update these and to improve them and to refine them. So, for example, we're doing so many meetings on Teams now. It will have a lasting impact on how we work going forward. And we're looking at new ways to be more inventive with people working from home and working from afar. And then, not to make the answer too long, we've got very innovative ideas on what to do in a post-COVID era, and as time goes by, we'll share that more openly. But a lot going on, and we are thinking about what type of service we'll run or we'll need to run in a world post-COVID, and the world's going to be very different, and we're thinking through those angles, and we'll make announcements along that as we go along.
Excellent. Just to remind all the people that have joined recently, if you could mute your microphone, I'd appreciate it, other than the speaker. Phil, will there be extra cleaning of your equipment and protections for your employees?
So we already now clean, and I saw a couple of weeks ago, as in, I think it was 2 weeks, it wasn't more than that, when the MTA in New York made a big thing about they're now going to move from 72-hour cleaning to 24-hour cleaning. We've been in 24-hour deep cleaning mode right from the beginning of the pandemic. Brian, I can't put it more firmly. Pre-COVID, people may have wanted to travel because they want to get from point A to point B. And the biggest consideration was probably how they get from point A to point B. I think post-COVID, people's biggest objective is health and safety. And therefore, the way to think about the world from our side is that our paramount objective, yes, we want to move people from point A to point B, but our paramount objective is every customer must feel health, must feel safety, must feel that they can come onto our railway, onto our bus services, and have the benefit of a safe, healthy environment. And that's what we're focusing on.
Do you think people's concern for public health will diminish the amount of people using public transit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll tell you, we've done a great survey of our customers over the last 2 weeks, and we only reviewed the results in the last week or so. And when you look at people's biggest concern is about what we as society do to ensure that they can be safe, do their work safe, do their family interaction safe, get to where they need to be in a safe way. I think that if transit feels like it's going to be risky, then we're gonna see less and less people use transit, and I think that'll be an unfortunate outcome. And that's why I think transit organizations throughout the world, whether it's airlines, whether it's bus services, whether it's train service, everyone's thinking about how do we offer a value proposition to customers that ensures that they can feel safe to take transit again. Your question's a good one though, and I can't really fully answer it, because I think there are some modes of transit that will always be challenged in a post-COVID world. The idea of a heavily congested train where people stand face to face facing each other, I think is not on the horizon in the short term. So we need to figure out ways to get people, to move people, and to move that capacity of people in new ways.
And what do you think that will be?
So I'm not telling you. In the nicest possible way, Brian, we've got a couple of ideas of what we want to do, and when the time's right, we're going to share those. We're finalizing those. I think there's stuff that we can do to make sure we get as much from the capacity that's invested, and that's what we're looking at.
And what has Metrolinx been doing from a capital expenditure standpoint during the last 2 months as we've had COVID-19? Yeah,
and this is an interesting bit. I'm out at Eglinton tomorrow morning because our work has gone ahead undiminished. Our construction activities across the board as continued. I still do my CEO level reviews on all the key projects month by month, and I was amazed at how the different organizations in our market have responded to COVID, and how they've managed to make the workplace safe with new ways of working. More than that, my biggest concern with COVID is as far as production rates go. Obviously, lots of concerns about COVID in the health space, but biggest concern on production was COVID's impact on our supply chains. We can manage how people work in a work environment, but if they haven't got the material that's necessary to complete the job, you're in difficulty. And the time that we had COVID in China is like a hole in the supply chain, and that hole in the supply chain gradually moved into the new year as China started to come back into production, and that supply impact was one that bothered me the most. And then very tangibly, even suppliers here in Canada, we've faced challenges across all of our projects. But the projects have, by and large, we've continued our rate of production, and it's a credit to the likes of the Acons of the world, the Canadians of the world, the Grasscans of the world, SNC Lavalin, ACS Dragados, all of these contractors have performed really well.
And what about the
Ellis Don? Let me not forget Ellis Don. Ellis Don's great. I know some of your members are Ellis Don members. So yeah, no, it's a credit to everyone.
And tell us about the Ontario line. What's the status of it?
Well, the Ontario line, as you know, the business case has been approved and finalized. We're in a very exciting phase where we're finalizing aspects of the alignment. That'll become public knowledge very soon. The alignment is not changing. The stations, everyone will see the stations are still as we anticipate them to be, but just how we implement the stations and what they look like are the things that we are working through now. These are challenging times for the construction industry. We've seen, and I've been very vocal about this, we've seen the construction industry move in terms of its risk appetite, because I think many transit projects in places like Ottawa and the like You know, I think the construction industry has realized where the risks are, and there's a movement away from taking on huge bundles of risk to having more segmented an approach to risk. Now, that's all fine, and we were anticipating that, and we were adjusting quite a lot of our procurement decisions and our contract delivery decisions accordingly. What COVID brings is a further layer of risk to the construction industry. I think some of the construction activities will see a drag, a slowdown in work, and that drag will manifest itself in different ways. Construction companies that are heavily leveraged with a lot of debt, perhaps, they may find this time different to what it was before. And so I think we must continue to listen, and that's one of the key parts of our procurement approaches. I take personal interest in all of the tenders that's going out, all of the jobs that are being procured, talk to the market, listen to the market, and that's going to be the biggest decision for us is then how do we have the right formula with which we procure the Ontario line, and that's a very exciting place for us to be.
Phil, your tenure now is a couple of years at Metrolinx. What's your vision for transit in the Greater Toronto Area now that you've been here a couple of years?
So at a level of generalization, the vision that we've set for Metrolinx as an organization is very simple, is to connect our communities. Now, it sounds simple, doesn't it? But one of the things I found driving businesses towards clear sets of objectives, if you start off with a clarity of concept, of idea of what you're about, it then dominates how you make decisions from there onwards. So let's look a little bit at this. Connecting our communities. You know, 2.5 years ago, when I joined here, there was like a focus to get GO expansion built, and then we will increase services. Now since I've been here, we've done something that's quite different. We focused on improving our utilization of equipment and utilization of infrastructure, and we've year on year increased our services by 17, 18 to 20% year on year. That increase has led to a stimulus in ridership, which in previous years were around 1.5% growth in ridership. In the last 2 years, our ridership was above 5.5%. And so we created a strong marketing team, and we've become much better at marketing our products, getting e-tickets out there, and therefore really stimulating what we are there to do. My motto here is run Metrolinx as a business. And with that focus, the growth has been phenomenal. Now, I have to tell you, since COVID, the decline has been phenomenal. So we've seen a huge impact on our ridership based on the COVID impact. And so when you ask me what my vision is, I talk to the mayors and the people in Kitchener, and I've said consistently, increasing train service to Kitchener is one of my top priorities. So is Durham. Increasing services down to Bowmanville is a critical objective. So is Niagara, and so is Hamilton, Barrie, and you know, if you look at the impact we've had on those communities with our increase in services, it's been phenomenal. And our minister is massively committed to increasing connectivity and transit connectivity across the region, and her very strong focus on us continuing to focus on customer satisfaction and building a business that runs as a business is exactly the sort of umbrella that we need as an organization to get our things done. I think many of your people on the call would know we are commercially a very different organization than what we've been before. And we drive for good business results and good value for money for taxpayers. So my vision, if you ask the vision question, it is about connecting communities, but the best way we can do that is by operating as a business. I mean, be a business. Very uncomfortable with trying to deliver transit objective as a bureaucracy. That just doesn't work. You got to run as a business.
Has your vision changed because of COVID-19? Is it a different vision today than it was 3 months ago?
Not really, not at all. So one of the things that struck me when I joined here in Canada is that we've got fantastic people in the rail industry. We've got fantastic people in organizations such as our construction community, our own organization and the like. However, I was not satisfied with, I would say, the safety culture in the industry. The way we do things feels many cases as if it's very antiquated, and that sort of vibrant safety culture focus that's typical of places such as Europe and the UK, that pervasive, absolutely pervasive sense of criticality of safety is not yet typical in the Canadian industry. And so for the last 2.5 years, we've been focusing on one of our most enabling strategies is our focus on safety. And what I see in COVID is just another dimension of making safety your central theme of your business, your central theme of how you transact, how you provide services, and how you do stuff. So COVID has just brought a different opportunity for us and a challenge to find new ways to serve our customers, and the safety remains paramount. And I think organizationally and culturally, we are in the right place because we're obsessed with safety.
How about yourself? How have you been dealing with your time during COVID-19? It looks like you're speaking to us from home. Are you working from home like the rest of us?
I have the good fortune that the transit industry is a necessary industry. And when I say good fortune, is it's humbling to be able to continue to deliver stuff during this period. So I spend a lot of my time out in the front line. I've got my own masks. I've got my desk now for the first time in 25 years of being a senior executive. I've got hand cleansing agents by the trillion bottles on my desk. I get out to our front line. I get out to so some days I work from home, but mostly I'm out there as support for our frontline people. I love our bus drivers. I love our station people. I love our safety officers. And I go around and I encourage these people. They face up to the challenge of COVID and dealing with the public, anyone who could be infected, and we do this, and it's humbling for us to be involved in this. So I'm actually not at home now. I'm sitting in my office, and as I say, tomorrow morning I'm out at the construction sites, similarly, to talk to our constructors and support them and the people that work for them. I think it's important that leaders are visible in a time like this.
I agree with you completely that leaders need to be visible. And I think that we are very lucky and honored to have such an accomplished, experienced individual as you running our transit system. So thank you for all that you do. I think we've only got a few minutes left with you. In our last few minutes, do you have a message? You've got 88 members of the transit industry and people interested in transit online listening to you now. Do you have a message for us?
No, I didn't anticipate that one, Brian. Yeah, look, perhaps the strongest message I can give is just thank you to all of you for your support. We can't be successful as an organization if we're not part of a network of people that are contributing to what we do. You either contribute directly as a supplier, directly as an employee, contractor. You very often contribute just as an opinion former, and whatever you guys whatever you guys are doing or contributing, the fact is, when people are passionate about something, as I know this group is, passion always comes through in the end, doesn't it? It always makes a difference. And so I just want to say thank you for that. And thanks for your support for the industry. And I know that transit is a nice, diverse topic for very diverse opinions. And everyone is a specialist and everyone has got 7 ways of doing the same thing. That's okay. That's how we are. And we enjoy that. And we respect people we respect everyone that contributes to the debate, and it's just a privilege for us to be the organization we are and to try and make a difference to our communities. So just thank you, all of you.
Well, thank you to Phil Verster. He's only available to join us until 25 after, so we're going to have to say goodbye to him. But Phil, your opportunity to come back is open anytime that you want to come and speak to the Transit Alliance. We'd love to have you to come one of our dinners sometime and pepper you with questions if that's appropriate, or just give you a podium for you to present some of your ideas. I think that for those of you that have worked with Phil, you'll know that he is an incredibly frank and honest gentleman. I've had the privilege of having breakfast with him a few times and conversations, and the man has got a wealth of experience. And he's been delivered a pretty tough job to deliver transit in our area, and complicated obviously by what all of us are impacted by in the last couple of months with COVID-19. So Phil, thank you so much for making yourself available to chat with us today. And I got to tell everyone that at 88 people participating, this is, other than some of our seminars, this is our best attended Transit Alliance event. So maybe working from home and doing things online is actually something in our future all the time. Anyway, Phil, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, everyone. Best of luck. Look after yourselves.
Thank you. So that was Phil Verster, Transit Alliance. Colin Earp is on the line. He is a member of our board and head of infrastructure at KPMG. And in a minute, if we can get organized, he's going to take us through a couple of thoughts about both COVID-19, but also the impact of COVID-19 on transportation infrastructure. And I think that'll be very interesting. Just for any of you that aren't aware, Transit Alliance is a civic advocacy organization. We've been around for almost a decade now. I'm the chair of the board. Colin Earp, Saba Ahmed, and a couple of others are on our board of directors. We do have a membership. We had said that the only people that could join today were members, but we opened that up because we had such a great request for people to participate. And we're thinking about having a series of these virtual events over the course of the next couple of weeks. We think that in a week or two, we're going to have the head of the TTC available to update us on the TTC. And then KPMG and us are working together on potentially a whole series of different seminar type events on infrastructure and transit that we're thinking about having. Colin, are you there?
I am indeed. So, Brian, just whilst you're putting up the presentation, if I can give those on the call a bit of brief history as to how I ended up speaking now. Was I was having a conversation with Brian the other day, and like most conversations with Brian, he had a need to fill half an hour, and without me knowing about it, I then offered to do that and fill that half an hour for him, and accepted the King's Shilling. So what I thought would be just an interesting half an hour, 45 minutes would be some of the things that we're seeing and learning, both from a global scale and a national scale around COVID-19, and what how the economic response and the governmental response is going to have to be mirrored by what we're doing in transport, but also understanding some of the key challenges that we had with transit. So I'm fortunate enough that I actually brought the brains of the outfit, Jennifer Schulman, with me to talk about economics. But if we have the presentation there, Brian.
I'm having a challenge getting it up, so go ahead.
So keep filling, is what you're saying. I feel like a sports commentator. And I thought that was fascinating from from Phil in terms of exactly how long they had been at some of this stuff, and that the team had been set up in January.
Hey, Colin, it's Jennifer. I'm happy to get started. I can walk through and the
That would
slides
be
will
great,
catch up to
Jennifer.
us if that would be helpful.
And then we'll let the slides catch up. So no, that'd be great.
Sure. So you guys have the fortune or misfortune of hearing a few minutes, I think, on the economic situation. I'm an economist by training. I'm also a partner at KPMG, so you're a bit surrounded today. Apologies for that. My expertise is, as I mentioned, in economics, but also with a substance focus on global public health. So this has been a bit of a, we'll call it a bit of a perfect storm for me right now. Combining those two fun disciplines. They don't usually collide quite like this, but in this case, they really have. And when we're able to get the slides up, the first slide that you're going to be looking at is really just an overview of sort of where things are at from a pandemic perspective. And as you'll see, which would be, oh, Brian, look at that. Well done. You're far more technologically savvy than I would be. So we could switch to slide 2 would be great. There we go. So this is a quick snapshot. I think this was taken this morning of the confirmed cases based on the WHO numbers. I took a quick look before our presentation, and there's already been another roughly 50,000 cases added. So and this is the global situation. So COVID-19 was declared a pandemic by the WHO. It is a unique pandemic in that it is not necessarily as contagious as other diseases. So it's less contagious than measles, for example. It's less contagious than H1N1 was. What's unique here is its death rate. So its mortality rate is significantly higher than, for example, H1N1. And you can see there's already been significantly more deaths than H1N1, and we are not finished with COVID-19 yet. Just to give you some perspective, in Canada, there's roughly around 72,500 cases as of this morning, and about 5,300 deaths. In Ontario, there's about 21,500 cases and about 1,800 deaths. Importantly, of those 1,800 deaths, about 800 of them, if not a bit more than that, are in long-term care facilities. So for those of us more active in walking around, the death rate's actually a bit lower than what is reported. For, again, not necessarily happy numbers, but it is helpful to know that just for perspective in terms of the everyday person. In Toronto specifically, there's been about 8,000 cases and 634 deaths, roughly. If we can move on to slide 2, I thought it'd be helpful to just run through what I call the recession alphabet. These are terms that you've probably read about in the newspaper or seen on TV, or it's just the nerdy economist in me that thinks and hopes you have. There's the V curve, which is the decline in the economy. So think of this as a recession, right? So you've got GDP falling and then bouncing back. And a V means very sharp, quick decline, very sharp, quick uptake, which is what everybody was hoping for when COVID started. And this is roughly 1 quarter. Just as a reminder, a recession is technically defined as 2 quarters of economic contraction. So we actually are not technically in a recession, although it certainly feels like one. And everyone is talking as though we are already in one. I feel like I'm obliged to say we're not yet in one. A U curve is, again, sharp decline, but a shorter, a longer flat at the bottom, and then a quick recovery, but you're in the recession for a bit longer. The dreaded L, some people call it the J, some people in Canada, of course, refer to it as a hockey stick. Can't help that one, is what we all experienced in 2008, 2009. So this is sharp decline, really slow, long, painful recovery. W, obviously 2 V's stuck together. This is also something we dread, which would be a second outbreak coming in probably the fall. There are lots of epidemiologists around the world, let's say especially in the United States right now, who believe that we will see a W. If I could predict that, I would have a different job. So, or no job at all for that matter. So if we can move on to the next slide. This is showing how quickly things are moving and changing from an economic perspective. So I earlier mentioned how quickly the numbers are changing from COVID perspective and the number of cases. This just shows you how the perspective has changed in terms of GDP estimates. So this is from the Office of the Parliamentary Budget. And in on March 27th, they were predicting a decline of 5.1% in GDP. By April 30th, that had changed to negative 12%. That's a massive, massive shift in 30 days. I'm sure we all experienced it. I'm sure many of you experienced it within ridership, but you can see how quickly it's changed and the predictions have adjusted. The main reasons for this, obviously, social distancing, huge impact. The other thing to keep in mind were the oil price shocks that we all saw. Negative oil, kind of unusual. Hopefully we won't see that again for a while. Moving on to the next slide, please. This is my good news slide. I like to think the glass can be half full, especially during a recession. So you can see the, ongoing decline of GDP, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. These are actually changes in estimates based on an annualized 2020. But what you can see is also 2021, and everyone is estimating an increase. This is the good news, right? So this is not meant to, this doesn't look like an L. This looks more like a V. So we're hoping that by anyone's account, by 2021, we will be in an increase. The economy will rebound. We will start to come out of this, which means by Q4 2020, we should start to see that benefit, if not even by Q3. What really impacts these numbers, to be completely honest, is how long social distancing and especially the lockdown, the quarantine is in place. The other thing to keep in mind is right now, and I've been on the phone with several of the large banks in Canada and some around the world dealing with their own financial forecasts, the steeper, or the worse the decline in 2020, the higher the increase they're predicting in 2021. So there's a corresponding negative. So organizations that are predicting, say, a -12 for 2020 might be then predicting a corresponding -4 or 5 or 6 for 2021. They have a higher 2021 than organizations that are predicting, say, a -5 in 2020. They would be more around a -2 or -3 for 2021. So that's some of the good news. Again, glass not all empty, hopefully half full. Moving on to the next slide, please. Back to some of the bad news. So this slide shows you the impact on unemployment rate. And this is a long view. It's showing you a comparison between some of our prior recessions. I am old enough to remember all these recessions. So 82, 83, pretty bad numbers. The blue line is unemployment rate. The yellow line is GDP. They usually move in different directions. And you can see, so in 82, 81, the increase in unemployment corresponds to a massive decrease in GDP. Same thing in 91, 92. Same thing in 2008, 2009, and at the tail end there, on the far right, you see the COVID crisis. In the table, you've got the unemployment rates that were predicted in February. We're not predicted, these are actuals for February, March, and then it shows you the change. The April numbers are now in as well, and I can tell you that the numbers are, as expected, worse. So the unemployment rate for Canada overall was 13%, which is quite high. And it's higher than anything you see on this chart. Just so for point of comparison, the highest unemployment rate was in the 1982-1983 recession. It didn't quite hit 12%. We are now at 13%. So unemployment is really quite, I don't want to say off the charts, but it's quite high. The month-to-month change between March and April is actually the largest on record. They started keeping these statistics in 1976. This is the worst change they've ever seen since 1976. Ontario unemployment is now at 11.3%. Alberta's at 13.4%. Quebec is the worst hit at 17%, and BC is at 11.5%. A couple of interesting things to note about the April numbers. The manufacturing sector was hit worse. It was not hit as bad in February or March, but has now been hit in April. February and March were really as expected, and I'm sure you saw yourself. Restaurants, hourly wage workers, things along those lines. The other thing to note that's kind of interesting is women are hit harder than men. There are more unemployed women than there are unemployed men. And some of that is probably due to the nature of the jobs, but that is another interesting factor here. Moving on to the next slide, please. So as a broad comparison, and in looking and trying to understand how the COVID recession, if you will, compares to prior recessions, it is extraordinarily different. I would argue that even though our unemployment figures are worse than prior recessions, it is still not what I would call it's not a structural problem with the economy. This is not a recession that we're going to be diving into because something is fundamentally wrong. It's not that interest rates are too high. We don't have inflation. Those are not the problems. The problem is we are locked in our homes. It is a healthcare crisis. The general belief still is that when this crisis is alleviated, the recession will end. It should be that simple. I think, though, there are some things to note, which is, most importantly, the longer it takes to facilitate the rebound, the longer we may cause some structural problems. And the question that we're starting to see in a lot of different sectors, including this one, is how to facilitate the recovery without jeopardizing public health. And that's the balance, right? So normally it's just, pump money into the economy, facilitate, growth, stimulus packages. Right now it's very different. The stimulus packages we're seeing, at least initially, were to backstop individuals' income, backstop rent, things like that, to get us through this healthcare crisis. There needs to be a balance as we go back to work. We don't have a vaccine yet. And when we do, which may be anywhere from, say, 6 to 18 months from now, it's not like it's going to arrive at our door in 6 to 18 months. It will take these pharmaceutical companies quite some time to manufacture 9 billion doses. That's a lot. These are difficult to manufacture. They're tricky. They are hard to distribute. And there's going to be a tiered system as that's disseminated around the world as well. So it's not like we're all going to be able to throw our doors open and, pardon the pun, but jump on the subway or the bus. I wish we could. But, making sure that we are confident in the economy, as well as confident in our healthcare system and confident in our own, personal health situation, is going to be really, really critical. I think that's all I had on the economy. If anyone has any questions.
Jennifer, I have a very quick question just on that. In terms of obviously the vaccine is going to be a key inflection point in terms of changing levels of trust. What else, when you're speaking to some of the economic powerhouses and some of the banks and the like, what are the other inflection points or moments of change that we might see in society?
From an economic perspective or from a healthcare perspective?
Well, from both, actually.
I think that from an economic perspective, I have to say the various governments at all levels have done a tremendously good job of trying to help ensure that people are not really suffering from a recession perspective. As much as the economy is contracting, people are still able to pay their rent on average. They've done a much, much better job of getting that urgently needed immediate stimulus package out there, much better than was done in the prior recession. So sort of kudos to our different levels of government there. And the provinces reacted differently, and that's to be expected. But I think that's a critical component here. The biggest concern that I'm hearing is reliance on trade with the United States and China. The other issue is, and this is a slightly different transit issue, but getting goods from one country to another. There are huge issues right now in shipping. There's, ships stranded around the oceans where sailors are not allowed to dock, literally. So you can't unload your goods sometimes. There's also issues getting out of port in areas like China, where you've had months of backlog. You've got, some distribution facilities and warehouses that are overflowing. So there really is this pent-up supply. They're hoping that the pent-up demand will meet that. So once that eases, I would say, they're hoping that, people are eager to get out. People are eager to go to the movies. People are eager to, go shopping in a store, not online. From a public health perspective, I think everyone's looking for, I would say, strong guidance. As much as people are, there's some questions around civil liberties versus public health guidance. I think my understanding is corporations as well as individuals are really seeking that very specific guidance from our governments in terms of understanding what we can and can't do. And I think that's going to be important, I'll call it cover, for different corporations to fall back on to say we are doing what is expected of us, if not more.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Jennifer.
Jennifer, could I ask you a question? Yesterday, a gentleman, Dr. Bright, testified in front of the Senate committee saying that 2020 will have the darkest winter in history. Was saying that we're going to have a second wave come in the fall or winter of this year that's going to devastate us. Do your numbers include a second wave, or are these assuming that we reopen the economies and we don't have a second wave?
Right now, the numbers are including a longer social distancing phase and a longer quarantine phase. They are not predicting yet a second outbreak in Canada. One thing that I would caution is what you will hear out of the US, especially from public health officials that are allowed to speak their mind, I would say, is very different than what you would hear here. The US is, they are not responding to what I would call best in class with respect to their public health response to COVID-19. I think that's probably not a surprise to anybody, but it's been well established that they just don't have their act together, and in so many different ways. I don't have enough time or patience to go through that.
Given that, then a final question on this page, if I could. You don't put what happened in 1918, 1919, 1920 and the Spanish flu influenza from an economic standpoint. What did happen?
So the Spanish flu, and well done citing it, by the way, very much had a W. So the second outbreak was in fact worse than the first. There's not a ton of equally reliable economic information there. It was also, it didn't spread as quickly as COVID because the world wasn't as small as it is today, so to speak, right? We weren't getting on planes and traveling overseas. But it was fairly awful, and the second outbreak was worse. And then they had a big, think of it as a capital W followed by a lot of little W's, lowercase w's, and it was an extraordinarily unfortunate and traumatic event, and it had major implications on the economy as well.
Colin.
So if we could pop on to the next slide, Brian. I think what we're sort of, what comes out of that is, the first thing that we've got to really get our heads around from a transport perspective is the kind of the level of confidence. And what this is really trying to show is what our activity, there is a disjoint between activity and confidence in terms of we don't naturally mirror it, but confidence will drive us going back to the transit system. And I think we heard a bit of that from Phil, but we're also hearing it from Jennifer, which is the top level is there is a vaccine. I know I can walk out of my house and feel safe. So that level of how much do I feel safe and how do I pass that off against the absolute need to use transport is going to be a fundamental equation going forward. And I think we also need to say that transit agencies are in the trust business at this moment in time. If anybody is thinking that we don't have to market transit right now in terms of the actions that we do to keep people safe, will be the same actions that build trust, that allow people to come back onto the system. That's going to be a fundamental for the recovery. I think the second thing as well, just to point out on what we're seeing is the recovery of transit and the recovery of the economy are not the same. And there is a much, it's far more likely that you're going to see a bit of an L for transit than even if you see a U on the rest of the economy. And you're going to see a very, very long L for airlines in the same, for exactly the same reason. So if we just move on very quickly, I would suggest that we've just been through the process over the past 2 or 3 months of what I would say is the first emergency response, where many of the things that I think government were thinking about are in these 5 areas. And I think only now we really, as organisations, understanding what we've got, how we need to apply it, and then beginning to apply it in a joined up way. I would have loved to have heard from Phil about how he was seeing a joined up transit system going on for the future. But actually, if you can just go on to the next slide, Brian, I think what we've got to say is governments, organisations, and individuals all have a social responsibility as well as a commercial responsibility to deliver. But this is where we are now. This isn't where we're going in the future. And I think personally, I wanted to take 5 minutes to talk about what I think the next 18 to 24 months looks like. So, Brian, if you could just put it onto the next slide, we come back to our alphabet. But underneath it, I think there's probably 4 major interesting points out of this. Number one is we are still in business continuity. We are still understanding how to apply some of the best practice and keep people safe. And if there was one thing that came out of what Phil was speaking about earlier on, safety, 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 and that's safety of our passengers, safety of our people, safety of our contractors, everybody in that process. Next up is, I think, we kind of see that whatever happens, until we are a reasonable way up the trust curve, until we have a vaccine, we're going to be in an interim operations environment. And that, originally we thought was going to last to September, could last to the end of the year, could last longer than the end of the year, in that respect. And we have to try and begin to understand that. But that is very much about defensive action. What do I need to do to keep people safe? What do I need to do to make sure we maintain and manage our liability on the system? What do we need to do to survive through this process? I think the bottom bar on there is actually where we go on the offensive in terms of recovery, and this is saying, how do I actually reach out to the riders and restart what that ridership rebound looks like? How do I use what is economically available to me? How do I take a more integrated view of what we can be delivering? But I think probably the most interesting thing that comes out of this is, we always talk about the future. We're on a transformation journey in transit anyway. We're moving from transport to mobility. So in that respect, I think that journey has always been sort of 5 years out. In 5 years, we'll be ready to start thinking about autonomous vehicles. In 5 years, we'll be thinking about frictionless transport. In 5 years, we'll be thinking about a number of different items that will be driven by technology. Well, I think what we're actually seeing is a huge acceleration of the future transport reality. If anybody doesn't think that we are going to have to really push presto for contactless payments, or we're going to think about what intermodal delivery looks like, if by the end of the year you aren't able to understand how busy a platform is on TTC, or how busy a bus is with the information that's been available to you, so you can make a decision about whether you're going to use that transit or not, and look at different ways of making journeys, then I think we're absolutely missing a trick. But Brian, if you move on very, very quickly, and I think the point there is to say, we need to operate in multiple different modes. And finally, in that respect, all of the challenges we had before COVID started have not gone away. We are still trying to manage capital costs. We still have state of good repair that needs to be dealt with and understood. We still have performance management issues that were there beforehand. So I think just in closing, there's sort of 2 bits I wanted to pick up. The first one was, Brian, if you could pop onto the next slide, the critical success factors for managing COVID. This is kind of pulled out of conversations we've been having with our Asian team, with the Australians, with the UK and Europe. It pretty much goes as you would expect it to say. The first one is get a team together to manage resilience. Because if we don't have a clear plan, we don't have good communication, we don't have meaningful leadership, then people feel like they're lost and we don't know exactly what we're trying to achieve during this process. And that kind of leadership and management is going to have to run. This isn't just a quick response team. This is 24 months of managing that process. And we can't just give it to the ops guys who are heavily burdened already. What we need to do is to understand exactly how that's going to be transforming our business going forward. And it has to be viewed in terms of skating to where the puck's going to be. We no longer should be just trying to deliver the services that we had before. In line with Phil's commentary, prioritize your people. I think absolutely keeping people safe is a fundamental right of or liability of the industry anyway. But I think from a commercial perspective, people who feel like they're put first at this time are the people who will trust the system much sooner as we move forward. So in that respect, there is actual commercial element and value that we can apply to trust and looking at how we manage that. Obviously, and anyone who read the board papers from TTC a couple of days ago will see that we are hemorrhaging money in terms of opportunity costs and lost fares, and which is obviously going to have a massive impact on the FBR going forward. But this is one of those rare opportunities. I remember in 2008 somebody said to me, "Don't never waste a good recession." This is an opportunity to really pick up on areas where there were process enhancements that could be made, things that we were probably pushing back against 6 months ago are things that we could probably get done going forward. And that's not just within the sort of the business model, but actually how we operate the asset. And TTC is going to go through this, and it's obvious that Phil is talking about this as well. We need to find a minimum viable operational environment whilst we're still in interim operations. But there is no reason we can't carry that through to new operations. Number 5, somebody in a year's time is going to ask the question, did we manage this well? Did we make the right decisions? Assurance, I think, is going to be a key, and we've already seen this in the Australian environment, of having an ability to act with confidence is part of knowing that you have a level of assurance that sits behind that says, A, I can describe what the decisions were made and why they were made, but B, I can also course correct as we go forward. And I was speaking to somebody recently, the only thing worse than a bad decision is no decision at all, and just floundering in sort of that sort of analysis paralysis. So we've got to find a way of being much more agile in the process. And then finally, money is going to be put into infrastructure and transport infrastructure to deliver and help pick up the change. And if truth be told, if we don't use that money in an interesting new way that makes it count, not just for now but for the future, then we're fools to ourselves, because we should make that that money count and every dollar sing. So just in the very last page there, Brian, I don't want to spend too much time. We're kind of in that react emergency phase. I think we've done all of the right things. We've started to collaborate in new and interesting ways, and we've been all been about communications. I would suggest, we absolutely now have to look at what an integrated response looks like for GTHA. I think we need to start to optimize our assets. We need to work together to build public trust. I think, there is a level of change that's going on that we need to understand and be assured on that. But the top left-hand box is the one that's probably the most interesting for me, which is to say we were transforming anyway. And back to Jennifer's good news message, is where there is a silver lining to what we're trying to do. And if we can take the opportunity, if we can understand what the opportunities that are being given to us right now to manage that transformation, accelerate what we were doing, make some pretty tough decisions, based on the availability of data as it stands now, then I think we come out of this better than we went into it. It will take some time to get back, and as I say, I'd not necessarily want to be in the aviation industry at this moment in time. But I think what we need to do is really start to focus in on how do we make this work, because we're not going to change the situation of people being affected. That force has bolted. Now it's what do we do to really make this work for us going forward. So, Brian, that's just two people's point of view, but hopefully that was informative.
Colin, I appreciate that. Let me ask you one question. Does transit have a future? Supposedly in China, transit usage is down in their recovery stage by 40%, and car purchases are going through the roof. And the traffic congestion on the highways is unbelievable. Do you think everyone's going to go back to transit, or is everyone going to go to cars?
No, everyone's going to go back to transit, Ron. I think it's just a matter of time. I did a quick poll with some of my colleagues the other day, which was, could you give me the date in which Spanish flu really hit? And we didn't really know, didn't really remember. We have short memories. We just need to get through this in that respect, as long as we have good answers and we have reasons for people to come back.
Are there any other questions for Colin or Jennifer? Any other questions?
That feels like either a sign of an incredibly good presentation or a busy day for everybody.
I got one question. Are you anticipating changes in mobility patterns as a result of broader changes on how employees will expect their employees and customers to get to work?
Jennifer, do you want me to start and then for you to?
Sure.
Absolutely hope so. I would suggest that if we can drive new ways of delivering transport products, I think if we can look at staggering how people get to work, I think our understanding of how much we can do remotely and how much we need communal effect to deliver on it. I would it would be a missed opportunity if we didn't change demand patterns. And I think broadly speaking, that is one of the biggest tools we have in transport resilience. So I'd absolutely hope so. But Jennifer, what's your
No, I quite agree with that. I think that we are going to see a distinct change. The question I think is going to be if the change is permanent. I think that I absolutely think that people are going to be riding public transit going forward. I don't think that everyone's going to want to buy a car. I don't think that millennials can afford to buy a car. And I think that one of the interesting things that we've seen from a public health perspective that results from COVID is the impact on climate change. So, and this I think relates directly to whether or not people increase car purchases, the types of cars they're buying, and their choices around public transport. So in Europe right now, you're actually seeing a huge uptick on bike riding more than car buying, which sort of makes sense. You're actually also seeing a huge increase, believe it or not, in the United States in terms of bike riding as opposed to public transit or buying cars. So I do think people are going to have to fall back on public transit. And I mean that in a good way. I think that we are going to need to see, a reduction in air pollution that's going to be ongoing. COVID is a lung disease, and you've seen massive, the probability of getting a significant, having trouble fighting COVID, I would say, if you get it, if you live in an area with bad air pollution, like parts of Brooklyn, your chances of coming out of it are much lower. So that only feeds into the need to continue with public transport. But I do think that we'll see some changes around ridership patterns, when it's used, time of day, and I think it's going to correspond to, shift changes around shift working. Manufacturers are not going to be able to run the same shifts they've always ran. It's going to have to shift, pardon the pun, it's going to have to change, and it's going to have to be a bit more fluid, and I think the ridership on public transport will follow.
Well, Jennifer, Colin, and Phil Verster, thank you so much for joining us today and speaking about transit in this COVID-19 era. For some of you that know and some of you that don't know, I have a nightly radio show that you may want to check out, because last night I had Josh Cole, the former chair of the TTC, on, and Monday I had Jennifer Keesmaat, the former chief planner for the City of Toronto, both of them on effectively this topic of what's going to happen to transit and infrastructure going forward. You may want to check that out. You can check it out at briancrombie.com, either on videocast or podcast. As far as Transit Alliance going forward, we're hoping that we're going to have a series of more virtual meetings for you. We think we're going to have the head of the TTC, and Colin is going to arrange for a couple of different seminars on different topics related to transit infrastructure. So I encourage you to stay in touch with us. And for those of you that haven't joined as members, please consider joining as a member. And all that information is on our website, transitalliance.com. Thank you all very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much, Brian. Take care.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Henry the Hun.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey guys, how are you doing?
Good. How are you, Brian?
Very well.
Our dog attended the meeting this time.
It was my first Zoom meeting without an interruption by an animal or a kid.
I know, they always pop up.
Christine, how are you?
This was really well done, Brian. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Maybe you can help me get some other guests.
Who do you want to talk to?
Whoever you can arrange.
Send me a note.
Tonight, you should listen to my show. I've got Aaron O'Toole on. I think you'll be interested in hearing what he has to say.
It's already calendared. I'm ready for you tonight.
I want to get the other leadership candidates. Can you help me get them?
Our firm acts for Peter, so yeah, that's not a problem. And I'm connected into Leslin. I'll put them. Yes, the answer is yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Josh Cole, I see you there. Did you leave?
Yeah.
We started talking about conservatives. Of course he left.
Howard Brown, how are you doing? Howard, can you hear me? There you are, Howard. How are you?
I'm great, Brian. How you doing?
Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you. Thank you for the introduction. I was just dealing with something, but I'm delighted to be here, and you're doing a great job, and delighted with the discussion today and participating.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Ryan.
Bye, Brian. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.